On today's special crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Blackhawks, the Wild rally from a 2-0 deficit to win 3-2. But did we have a ref show at the X?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? Welcome into a special crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Blackhawks. We are your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild and the Chicago Blackhawks, and we thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Blackhawks is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks joins us to talk about a 3-2 win for the Minnesota Wild, in which the Blackhawks got out to a 2-0 lead. The Wild rallied to tie and then to win. And the officials were watching another game, evidently. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Connor Bedard and some of the particulars from today's game as well. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild since 2021. Joined by my good friend Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks. And Jack, Black Friday special. The NHL had like 9 games that started before 3 o'clock today, which is just a great way to do that with everybody out shopping. Just have all the games on during the afternoon so that people come back and they're like, wait, the Wild won? The Blackhawks lost? The Seattle Kraken gave up 7 goals to the San Jose Sharks? Just kind of an odd day, but it was fun to have like every team in action today. It just was a little indicative of a couple of teams that looks like they had plenty of turkey yesterday.
Yes, it was definitely a little bit of a slow start to this one, which I think was pretty predictable with the timing of the game, as you mentioned, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the day after Thanksgiving. I imagine most of these players wanted to enjoy the day with their families, and I'm sure had some good food to eat. So, yeah, the timing of the games, I don't quite understand it, Seth. I like pumping out all your big guns on one day and getting attention for the league. I like it, but it just feels like they went with almost an NFL strategy and forgot they're not quite the NFL, that everyone is just automatically going to tune in when the games are on, like the National Football League gets. Because I definitely wasn't ready for the 1 o'clock start, and I'm sure there were many other fans and people covering those said games that felt the same way. But nonetheless, there was a hockey game that went on, and it was, a typical game that we've seen on my side of things for us Blackhawks fans out there numerous times this year. And actually, Seth, Blackhawks have now had the lead or been tied after 20 minutes in 8 consecutive games. They can get off to good starts. They can put together good periods, and they're a good defensive team. They did a lot of good things defensively in this game. Kirill Kaprizov didn't go crazy. They allowed 3 goals, but 2 of them were kind of fluky. One, Peter Mrazek saves literally 999 times out of 1,000. Another banks in off of Connor Murphy, and the Blackhawks just don't have enough offensively to overcome those deficits. And, when you're this offensively challenged, Seth, the mini blunders can really, really cost you. And that's kind of what we saw today, unfortunately, because the Blackhawks have played a lot of games like this and they deserve more wins than they have. And they just lack the firepower, my man.
And I think we saw that in the first matchup between these two teams. And this was something that I tried to kind of key in on before the season even started. Is I know the numbers are lopsided in this series recently, but this is a Chicago team that is trying to, they're trying to continue to build steps up the ladder to where these games are probably going to be a little more competitive than they've been in years past with the players that have been added at the deadline. Oh, and then Ryan Donato has 10 goals so far this season. He scored twice against the Minnesota Wild, adding to the list of players that score against the Minnesota Wild after leaving the Minnesota Wild. How surprising has Ryan Donato been to this Chicago mix so far this year?
Oh my gosh, it's been so needed. Ryan Donato leading the team in goals, I don't think was on anyone's bingo card at the quarter mark to begin the season. He's been excellent, but I'll tell you what, Seth, he's there hasn't been really anything fancy about how Ryan Donato's gone about his business. It's not like he's turned into this new bona fide sniper on the power play who's hammering home one-timers or anything. No, he just plays a straightforward, simple game, fires a lot of pucks on net. Even the second goal that he scored on the power play, Seth just got the puck right away over there at the left dot after a nice play by Connor Bedard at the right boards to move the puck over there. Just gets the puck and puts it on cage. A deflection, has the puck bounce past Marc-Andre Fleury, bing, bada, boom, his second goal of the game. He scored a lot of goals that way and just going to the dirty areas, crashing in on rebounds. His first goal of the game, just a turnaround shot from out in front of the slot, just winning those types of battles and finding themselves in good spots. There hasn't been anything fancy about it. And the Blackhawks just really have needed more of that out of their key guys. And that's really been the biggest disappointment, Seth, is, we're getting good play from Ryan Donato. We're having guys who are putting together good seasons, but it hasn't been the impact forwards, particularly the ones that were brought in this offseason, like Teuvo Teravainen, Tyler Bertuzzi, Taylor Hall. Those guys haven't been good enough, so it's kind of almost canceled out the strong performance that we've got from Ryan Donato offensively, but he's been excellent and it's been great to see.
And, on the flip side, after that Donato goal, it seems like that's been the MO for Marc-Andre Fleury at this stage of his career, now officially 40 years old, winning on his birthday, always nice. But it seems like that's kind of the MO for where he's at in his career is if you can get to him early, you can probably get at least one on him right away. He had the one in his most recent start where he was getting set up to bat the puck towards the boards on the right side. Puck takes a weird bounce off the sheet, and it ends up going 5-hole. Now, to be fair, he was maybe setting up for a little more flair than he needed to on that type of a play. But after that, like after the early goal, it seems like he has done a really good job of tightening things up and not allowing any additional chances. Chicago scored pretty quickly in the second period, and at that point, you're like, oh boy! But we saw the vintage Fleury again. He sprawled out to make a couple of key saves. He had another one of those where he's laying on his back and he's able to just wall it out. I don't know how a person is coordinated enough to do that. Like I can barely coordinate sitting down and tying my shoes, let alone like sprawling out in the crease to stop a puck from going in. But the numbers continue for him to be pretty good. 5-0-1 now on the season, and he did a great job as the game went on of just stopping Chicago from getting anything going. But that defense, though, that Minnesota Wild defense, they get a little bit of adversity early on, and they just turn the clamps and tighten the screws. And next thing you know, you're sitting on 22 shots for the game after a nice little volley to kind of get things going.
Yeah, no. And whenever Fleury did get tested in those final two periods when it felt like the Wild started to get settled in a little bit more, he came up with the big saves. The Craig Smith breakaway, I think, was one that really could have been a little bit of a turning point in the game. Blackhawks already gotten a couple past him. They were the ones who had a little bit of added mojo early on in the game. So I thought that was an opportunity to, when they score 3 goals this year, Seth, that's kind of their magic number. When they score 3 or more, you like their chances because defensively they're capable of limiting you, and they've gotten some really good goaltender play for the most part this year. But yeah, Fleury came through with some big saves, and then late in the game, some interesting penalty calls, but also it felt like the Blackhawks, when they had their extra attacker out, when Peter Mrazek was off the ice, they couldn't get any real sustained pressure to go and tie that game. It was kind of too little too late at that point.
Yeah, the game really flipped in the span of about 60 seconds with Kirill Kaprizov, shocker, leading the way, and Marco Rossi gets the first goal. And then Jared Spurgeon on his birthday as well gets a couple of goals. As you talked about, maybe not, there was some puck luck involved in both of them, to say the least. But that's just... You just saw the blueprint for this Minnesota Wild team for most of the season. Obviously, at the beginning of the season, they were getting the early lead all the time and were being able to hold it. Now there's been a little bit of a course correction to where other teams have gotten the advantage first, but the Wild just calmly go about their business, and they're able to rally to tie and then to take the lead. And I've said this all season. It's on the strength of the defense and the goaltending, and Kirill just buzzing up the ice and setting people up for opportunities to make some magic as well.
Yeah, that was just a marvelous play that he made to get that Wild offense going, turning a 3-on-2 into a 2-on-1, a play that very few guys can make, going cross ice with the spinorama on Alex Vlasic too as well, our best defenseman in that instance, a play that you don't usually see get by him. If he's going to take a little bit of a gamble there and step up on a player like Kirill Kaprizov, he's usually pretty confident that he's going to be able to get a stick on a puck like that and not leave his other defenseman in harm's way. And that one got by him, and that one really, really felt like it was the moment in the game where the Blackhawks went, uh-oh, what happens now? And those little hiccups, those little moments have been the difference so far this year, and just the little unfortunate breaks. It felt like they were going to start going the Blackhawks way, Seth. They had a 6-goal performance the night before Thanksgiving, the first time they had potted 6 this year. It was like, oh my gosh, finally the bounces are going our way. And then a crazy, crazy bounce off of Connor Murphy. Jared Spurgeon, it almost looked like he tried to do it on purpose. And if he did, hats off to him, because Murph was standing right there in the crease. And sadly, he's been the culprit of a couple of those this year. And then, yeah, just Spurgeon's birthday luck, I guess, on that second one, because Peter Mrazek has truly been the backbone of this team. I mean, he has been spectacular. And I can't even think of another goal off the top of my head where I've been like, wow, that's one that Peter really has to stop. And it's just the most unfortunate time for this Blackhawks squad. Just, what can you do? Weird game of hockey sometimes. That's what I texted you. This is just such a weird game. There's no predicting it at any point in time, and unfortunately went against us. And it's just kind of been the story of the season, Seth.
And that's, we talk about course correction. In the first game between these two teams, Mrazek goalied his way to a win for Chicago in overtime. And then you have the other shoe dropping and a couple of puck luck goals that go the Wild's way. So, as I always like to say, everything always balances out. Yeah. As Liam Neeson said in the Phantom Menace, there's always a bigger fish. Things just have a way of balancing themselves out over the course of an 82-game season.
That is very true. I will say it was nice to finally get back in the W column against the Minnesota Wild a couple of weeks ago. Thankful that Peter Mrazek was able to put together that performance to spearhead that 2-1 overtime victory, because it had been far too long since we had gotten the job done against this Wild bunch.
We have a lot more that we're going to discuss. We're going to talk about Connor Bedard, whose numbers are a little bit lower than I think a lot of people would expected they'd be so far this year. We're also going to talk about the Minnesota Wild special teams, because I'm starting to call it the low power play as opposed to an actual power play. And I want to get your thoughts on something that Chicago did to try to disrupt. And we're going to talk about ref show, because the officiating has just collectively been an eyesore for large parts of the season, and it seems like it's happening in every game, every sport. So we'll talk about what the NHL could do to maybe help mitigate this a little bit, all as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild and Locked on Blackhawks after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Whether you want to see Connor Bedard and the Blackhawks in action, whether you want to see Kirill Kaprizov take the ice at the Xcel Energy Center, whether you want to see whoever is the new coach for the Chicago Bears take the field at Soldier Field, you name it, you can find great tickets for all of the teams in both of these cities by heading to Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Today's episode is also brought to you by Built Rewards. PSA for anybody who rents. If you haven't heard of Built, you are going to thank me. Earning rewards on rent is now a reality when you pay your rent through Built. You don't even have to check with your landlord to start earning points that you can use towards flights, hotel stays, fitness classes, and even your next rent payment. Let me break it down for you. There's no cost to join Built, and as a member, you'll earn valuable points on rent and on your everyday spending. Built points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones you haven't heard of. There are over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels and properties around the world you can redeem your Built points towards. So if you're not earning points on rent, my question is, why not? Start earning points on your rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNHL. That's joinbilt.com/LockedOnNHL. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. That's joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNHL to start earning points on your rent payment today. Welcome back to today's crossover edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Blackhawks. Once again, we thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. And when we get the opportunity to break things down after a hardly fought, closely contested Central Division collision, there's no better place to go than Locked On. So we appreciate you tuning in each and every day of the week. All right, Jack. I saw something that was interesting for Chicago in the Minnesota Wild in the power play opportunities that they had, which came later in the game. The Blackhawks were using a player to try to shadow the drop pass person, the drop passer, or the drop passee for the Minnesota Wild. And it seemed like it made life very difficult for Minnesota to even gain the zone on their power play opportunities. And so I may be putting you on the spot here a little bit, but is this something that Chicago has done throughout the season? Or did Chicago just say, we might have a tell here that can keep Minnesota off the power play board?
You know, quite honestly, Seth, it hasn't been something I've really noticed, and I don't believe it's something they do frequently. But what is funny about it is they use the drop pass very often on their power play, and they've used it for, probably over a decade, going back to the Patrick Kane days. That was the way they went about it on the man advantage, was drop it to Patty Kane, let him walk into the offensive zone. And quite honestly, you know, I don't recall the Blackhawks power play in 2015, 2016. I was a little young at that point in time. But since I've gotten into covering this Blackhawks team, really since about 2018, 19, those back years of the dynasty era, but there was still Patrick Kane was there, Jonathan Taves, Alex DeBrincat was off to a really good start to his career. There was still a lot of talent, Duncan Keith on the back end. And the Blackhawks power play really has never been good. I think they've been top 10 in 1 year since I've covered them. And a lot of people point to the drop pass as being a symptom of that, because it feels like it's one of those things where everyone sees it coming. Everyone knows who's about to get the puck. I particularly don't really like it with Connor Bedard. It feels like it hasn't helped his zone entry rate in terms of using it on the man advantage. So I do wonder if Luke Richardson, who is a defensive-minded head coach, a former NHL defenseman with over 1,500 games, I wonder if he's recognized that, just completely stymieing his entries on the power play this year, and saw the Minnesota Wild kind of utilizing the same tactics, and is like, well, boy, oh boy, this is shutting me down. Let's see if it's going to work against these guys. And it happened to kind of slow him up a little bit. It hasn't been something that I've noticed consistently, but I am for sure against the drop pass on the power play. I don't know if you feel the same way or your fan base feels the same way about it, but I know our Blackhawks fans are passionate about it over here.
I don't know why, but visually, I think it was the Florida Panthers and maybe the Edmonton Oilers that do this primarily. I just love having three guys go in at once, and you have either the guy in the middle be the one with the puck, and he can go left or go right, depending on how much attention crashes to him. Or you start it with the guy on one side of the zone, and he can go middle if his route is obstructed. That just seems much more visually pleasing to me because I still do it. And it probably is just something I'm trying to be vindicated by with the lack of success the power plays had recently. Every time I see a drop pass, I'm like,
you know where it's going already. Like it's not going to work, right?
Like, you're not fooling anyone. If you're playing cards, you might as well flip your hand over.
I know. And I feel like there are certain players in this league who can get away with it because they have lightning speed like a Connor McDavid, but those players are few and far between. So yeah, it's certainly not my favorite thing, but I do wonder if Luke Richardson has just watched it work against him this entire year. And he's like, if you can't beat him, join him.
Yeah. If I can't beat them, I may as well try to defend them the way other teams have defended us and see if it works. And it did. The Wild went 0 for 2. Chicago went 1 for 3 on the power play. Don't even get me started on the Wild penalty kill. Like, I just don't want to talk about it. Like, they had 2 good kills, but it seems like every kill in which they give up a goal, they do like 90% of what they need to do. And it's always that last 10% that leads to a goal for the opponent.
It didn't make sense when I was looking at their numbers going into this game. I always check out the NHL previews on the app, and first in the NHL in goals allowed this year, 28th on the penalty kill. What is good? You guys fortunately must stay out of the box pretty well, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been the only saving grace, is that the Wild are like the 3rd least penalized team in the league, which is a large departure from where they've been over the last few years. They had, I think it was last year, nearly hit 1,000 penalty minutes on the season, and their penalty kill for the season was at like 68%. And I'm like, well, gee, I wonder why.
Yeah, that's tough.
But this year they were at one point the least penalized team for a few weeks. Now they're 3rd least. They're still in pretty good shape in terms of being like the bottom 5. It just still is like they're doing 9. You're getting that A, but penalty kills are judged by whether you give up goals or not. And so even if you do 99% of what you need to do and you still give up a goal, it's still a failure.
Do you think that's something they're going to be looking to add potentially, like at the deadline, someone who can help out in those areas? Do you think that's, I mean, obviously off to this type of start of the season, you don't want to get ahead of yourselves. We're only a quarter of the way in, but looking at this Minnesota team, they only have 4 regulation losses up to this point in time, 2nd in the league in point percentage. Seth, you got to be ecstatic about where they're at, but this feels like it's the hole on the team, at least from an outsider's perspective. Do you think that could be an area where they'd be looking at here in the next couple months?
I think so. I think the big areas are going to be 5-on-5 scoring, and maybe somebody that you can get players that are nice 2-way players that can help you in all of those areas while also being really good in the goal scoring department. I can already tell this is probably going to be a problem because I've already talked myself into Brock Nelson. Like, the Islanders are very bad, and they're not going to be in it by the deadline. They're very old. They're very slow. They're very bad at pretty much everything that you can do. I'm sorry, Islanders fans. If you're listening to this, I'm not trying to be overly critical, but
they're good at getting to overtime. They're really good at getting to overtime.
There is that. I'm sure Islanders fans are listening to this, though, and being like, well, he's not wrong.
No.
But I'm like, Brock Nelson's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. He is a great face-off guy. He's good offensively. He's good defensively. He's not a like fringe top 6 guy. He is a top 6 guy. So you add somebody like that into the mix, and John Hines has mixed and matched lineups like Dr. Frankenstein this year. Just gives him another weapon that he can use. He really likes to, especially late in games, he really likes to play center matchups to try to win faceoffs. And you add a guy like Brock Nelson into the mix who can score, who can win faceoffs. He's winning them at 56% this season, which is pretty good. You add a guy like that to the mix, and that gives you another one of those, like, I got a king of diamonds in my hand now that I can play whenever I want. I just would love to see it happen, but knowing how my luck works, it's going to end up that the Islanders go on some sort of a run, or like, I'm not even going to say that because I don't want to jinx it. I was going to say some other team in the Central Division is going to go get a guy like that. But it'd be that, or if Vancouver would somehow fall out of it, Brock Besser. But I do get the sense that the Wild are going to do something to try to help further what has been a really good start for them this year, and a start that feels sustainable. Because even if the offense kind of goes hot and cold, the defense and the goaltending really haven't this year. And those are the things that you build a team on to win championships. And those have been the strongest parts of the team all season.
Call that a good foundation, my man.
Yeah, it's definitely a good foundation. Unless you have a game that comes down to some key calls one way or the other. We'll talk about some head scratchers and why it just feels like it's time for the NHL to do something, because it's not getting any better. And I'll give you a hint. It's starting to go the other direction. So we'll talk about the officiating. We'll also talk a little bit about Connor Bedard and his start to the season. We got a lot to get to as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild and Locked on Blackhawks after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild and Locked on Blackhawks is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to a special crossover edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Blackhawks. Once again, we thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. Make sure to check out both shows as we guide you through the rest of the season, as Chicago tries to keep closing the gap between the rest of the Central Division teams, as the Minnesota Wild keep trying to keep pace with Winnipeg at the top of the Central. All right, Jack, let's dive into it, because it's something that's gonna get me frustrated, because it's something that we have to talk about almost every game. I don't like to do it. Like, Locked on Wild listeners know that I make a point to really try to just distance from the officiating, because my whole thing is there are a handful of other incidents throughout the game, or events throughout the game, that impact the outcome equally as much as a blown call does. That being said, there were a few in this game, to say the least, that don't make no sense. Like, it just the one that I'm going to point to is the icing at the end of the game. The Blackhawks had pulled the goalie. Peter Mrazek was on the bench for the extra attacker. Yakov Trenin sends the puck down to the other end of the ice. Marcus Foligno clearly wins. He clearly gets there first. Like, there is no even debating that. And he gets the puck. He fires it into the empty net. Hold up. Wait a minute. The officials blew it dead due to an icing. What makes it even better is that the next faceoff came in the neutral zone.
Yeah.
Which is a clear indicator that it was not icing.
And it was their third arguable blunder in about a 6-minute stretch. And Seth, before we even get into these calls that happened today, I'm in agreement with you. I'm someone who, on my show, I'm never one to go and gripe about officials. And quite honestly, I had talked maybe a week or so ago on my show, and I said, I'm not someone who usually does this, and I think this is the first time I am ever doing it here on Locked on Blackhawks since I've been the host, but what is going on with the officiating this year? Because it has just been outrageous. And then something like this happens today, And it's just like, I don't want to make it a talking point because there are far more other entertaining and noteworthy things that did go on in this game between two Central Division foes, another close contested one score affair between these two teams this year. But it was the talk of the third period because, first off, as you mentioned, the icing was undoubtedly the worst of the three calls. Marcus Foligno won the race. The goal horn sounded. He celebrates. Then the refs go and call it off, and then the face-off happens in the neutral zone. It's like, okay, so now you got to go and talk to John Hines with your tail tucked between your legs and said, I made an owie. And then there was the Ryan Donato penalty call when moments earlier you could have made a gripe. He had drawn a penalty. It was a ghost penalty on him. It was a brutal stretch officiating-wise to close out the game. And listen, if it happens every now and then, if this was the first time it happened this year, I promise you, Seth, we wouldn't be talking on today's show about it. But I feel like the officiating and the lack of good officiating has been it's been worse than it's ever been in the NHL, in my opinion. And I've always been someone who's given the NHL officials a lot of credit because in terms of them, the NBA and the NFL, who deal with a lot of officiating calls, Major League Baseball obviously is one too, but it's kind of a different situation. Out of those three, the NFL, the NBA, and the NHL, I've always said the NHL has the best refs, but this year, It feels like something's gotten away from them, and I don't know what it is, but this has happened too often, and again, we're only 21 games into the year now.
And I continue to see, I think the one that aggravates me the most is when an official is standing right by something that's going on and just is oblivious to it. It could be, there could be two cars that hit head on and they don't see it. This happened. Ryan Hartman was getting basically held down. I think it was against the Winnipeg Jets, and Matt Boldy goes over to try to help. And he gets called for the penalty because he came over to try to help Hartman get off the ice. And it's like, well, what about the player that is holding Ryan Hartman down? Like, why aren't you doing anything about him?
You got to call what you know and not what you think. And the Connor Murphy tripping in the third period that happened today was clearly not a trip. Clearly, I think it was Rossi or whoever it was had gotten caught an edge and clearly fallen over. And that was the second penalty the Blackhawks took in the third period. And this is when they're trying to claw their way back down a goal. And feels like those are ones that in a close contested game late, you got to leave. And you clearly didn't know it was a penalty because we saw in the replay it wasn't. So, you got to call what you know and not what you think happened. You got to be 100% positive. And even on the Foligno icing, he didn't put his hand up and blow it dead when it should have been ruled icing. So it was like, what is going on here? It's a clown show, and the NHL is better than this officiating-wise historically.
Yeah, you're spot on in that it just seems like officials are calling what they expect to happen based on a couple players get tangled up, and because this player went down, well, it's got to be a trip or it's got to be something because that's the only way that makes sense. It's like, well, no, look at what happened is they got tangled up, or on the Trennan the clearing attempt all the way down. Well, that has to be an icing because there's no way anybody from Minnesota is going to be able to get there before Chicago. It's like, You don't know that. You can't make that call. And this is something that Locked On Wild listeners have called for, and I've kind of mentioned it myself because I think it's a great idea. I think we need a pool reporter. I think NHL games need a pool reporter to talk to reporters after games because there's no other way to get accountability other than having the officials have to answer for some of these calls. That's the only way that you're going to get it to improve. It's like, well, I don't want to keep answering these questions, so I better pick my game up here a little bit.
Yeah, it's in every sport. I mean, NFL happens all the time. The officials never have to answer for why they did the things they did. You can even go to UFC and the judges. People have a lot of issues with judges, and no one has to ever talk to these guys. And there's the problem with them not being full-time employees, and there's that battle between it. And it just really feels like, for the amount of money that these professional sports leagues are raking in these days, you got to have a more buttoned down situation with your officials to hold the integrity of your games together, especially when, I mean, we're doing ad reads for FanDuel every GD day here on the podcast, and we're watching this happen in the final minutes of a hockey game where I'm sure there were some people laying back on their Friday afternoon who had some money down on the Chicago Blackhawks thinking, I just got robbed here. What did I just watch?
Yeah.
Or someone who had the Minnesota Wild -1.5. Sorry, bud. That's tough. Sorry, bud.
Well, the one just to kind of wrap this up, the one earlier in the week that just really got me was I think it was last week's Thursday night football game where they said that they couldn't use the pylon cam to rule on a touchdown
because not every field has them. It's 2024 in the NFL.
You are making more money than some countries, and you can't put a pylon cam in every stadium.
Yeah, right.
That seems a little sus, as the kids say. But I don't know. It's something that every team is dealing with. So I guess I take solace in there have been far worse calls that have had far bigger impact on games than an empty netter to go up by 2 at the end of the game. But like you said, the people that had the Wild -1.5, there were probably glasses, mugs thrown, loud expletives in sports bars, because that's just where we're at with sports now. Is there people have a monetary stake in these games, and when stuff like that happens, it has a real impact.
Yeah, right. It just where these leagues are, the year that we're in. I mean, you got to pick different battles. These are ones that are musts these days to hold the integrity of your game and your league. And I don't know if they care about that enough, quite honestly. I think they just care about the dollars.
Figure out what goaltender interference is.
Oh my goodness! Don't even. What's offsides? What's a catch? What's a catch? What's offsides?
Oh, that was another one the other day where the Wild had a goal overturned because there was a, like, frame by frame, there was a bit of white between the skate and the line before the puck crossed. And I'm like, if we're doing frame by frame, we have lost the mark here. Like we have missed the mark so much.
Right.
Then again, if it was a team playing the Wild and they found that, I would say, hey, credit to the replay center for going as far as they needed to do to overturn the goal.
I don't know. It's wild.
Yeah, it is. It's something that's going to need to be changed. But unlike that, I am perfectly happy with the result of the game, and so we'll take those 2 points and better luck next time for the Chicago Blackhawks. Couple cracks left at this historic rivalry, and a chance to maybe get another one in the win column against the Wild later on.
Love to take the season series somehow. I mean, I don't even know if that's happened in the last half decade. So
no, I don't think it has.
2 wins in a year, I'd take that. Against this Minnesota squad.
That'd be progress. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. Appreciate you joining, Jack, and hopefully listeners like this. I haven't done one of these like true like in-depth post-game breakdowns for a long time. I dig it. Like I like kind of a different way to really digest what happened in a game and get a chance for a little back and forth. So hope all of you enjoy it as well, and make sure so that we can continue to do all of this and more. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you comment. Make sure you subscribe. All the interaction helps get us seen more by the YouTube and podcast algorithms. So make sure to interact and share. Tell your friends. Tell people you aren't friends with. I don't care. Tell people that you know or don't to listen to the show, and it'll help us get further exposure out there as the season unfolds. You can find new episodes for both Locked On Wild and Locked On Blackhawks every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.